So look, thank you everybody for joining us, and welcome to the virtual launch of the AuScope 10-year strategy and 5-year investment plan. I'd like to thank you for joining Chris Pygram, Joe Condon and myself for what's going to be a fairly informal walk through these two documents that we've delivered to you today. There's a link there on the screen. You would have received the link in the email that you received as well. So if you haven't yet downloaded them, please do. And we're basically just going to run through these documents today to give you a sense of what's in them and how we put them together, and hopefully how we're going to use them over the next decade. I just want to start with some housekeeping. We intend to answer questions that any of you might have about what we're talking about today. So please use the Q&A feature. If you haven't used Zoom webinars before, you'll notice that there's a Q&A button. So please write any questions you have in that Q&A section. We will attempt to answer all of the questions that we receive after we finish speaking today, but any that we don't have time to get to, we'll certainly write written responses to on our website over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so with that, I'm going to now hand over to Chris Pygram, who's going to welcome us and introduce the day.
Thanks very much, Tim. And can I formally start this meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians in the land on which each of us are located today, on which we conduct our business across the Australian continent. For me, that's the Ngunnawal people. I respect their elders past, present and emerging, and their continued connection with the land, sea, sky and waterways for tens of thousands of years. I'm delighted to be able to welcome you all today. This is a really great day because back in 2018, the AuScope board decided that it's necessary for us to refresh the investment plan. We'd been operating on the previous investment plan that was then nearly a decade old. And to do that, we needed a strategic plan within which to embed the investment plan, if you like. So the board tested the idea with the department. They were happy for us to proceed. And as a consequence, Tim and his team went through, as you would probably all be aware, a huge process of workshops, working groups, to gather the community's ideas about what these plans actually should encompass and what they should entail. So they're very much your plans, and we're delighted to be able to release them to you today after so much consultation. So thank you for your input. And what I'd also like to draw your attention to today is that when Tim goes through this, it's clear that the role of AuScope has evolved. So in a way, we've become the connector between the community, government, academia and the industry. It's not a role we've sought, but we've filled a gap in our community where there was no simple mechanism to bring everyone together to undertake a task like this. So we're very pleased to have the opportunity to build a new strategic plan and to out of that distill an investment plan that reflects your interests going forward. So again, can I thank you for all the work that you put in working with the team to bring this to fruition. And it's particularly important, I think, that we acknowledge the efforts that Tim, Joe and Tanya went to in terms of organising all the workshops, all the community groups and bringing them together so that we're in this position that we're in today. So very pleased that we've made it to this point, that we can release the plan today. And I hope that you find it reflects your interests and the opportunities that you will be pursuing in your research over the next 5 years at least. And then hopefully we can help you in terms of the provision of the infrastructure that you need that will enable that research. So without further ado, let me hand back to Tim, who will begin the process of walking you through this document. So Tim, back to you, mate.
Okay, look, thanks very much, Chris. As Chris said, today we present two documents to you. These are designed as companion pieces. There's the 10-year strategy and the 5-year investment plan. As I already said, there's a link there for those of you that joined later to download it if you haven't already downloaded it through the links that were emailed out earlier today, yesterday evening. So these two documents were developed through really broad community engagement. As Chris said, it took us 18 months really to put these together. We had an initial meeting in Adelaide about 18 months ago where there were over 120 people involved. Subsequently, we held 3 discipline-specific workshops, which dealt with field deployable infrastructure, laboratory-based analytical infrastructure, and digital infrastructure as well. We then developed 3 working groups from those workshops, which provided a series of program submissions and justifications for the investments that were proposed. And the words that came through from that process form part of what we present to you today. But the discussions that took place in those meetings and the one-on-one discussions we had with all of you in the community over the last 18 months really form the basis of what we're putting out to the community today. So in the end, there were over 150 scientists involved in the development of the concepts behind these documents and the documents themselves. And we thank every one of you for your input. So the first of the 2 documents is the 10-year strategy. Now, this document defines our organisational goals for the next decade. It outlines our vision for the downward-looking telescope, which is the principal infrastructure investment that we propose to make. It's a fairly high-level document. It doesn't really need a lot of technical expertise to dive into it. And it really describes a series of goals and implementation plans that are relevant to AuScope, no matter how we find ourselves operating over the next decade. So they're relevant to us if we should be successful in accessing some new capital and investing in the new investments that are proposed with the investment plan. But they're also relevant to us operating as we do today, and they're going to shape the way our current programs are managed and operated and the way that we interact with the community. So particularly this 10-year strategy is a forward-looking document relevant in any funding environment. The second document is the investment plan. It's focused on the specific new investments that have been outlined by the community as being critical to our ongoing research needs. And it has a fair few more technical details in it that talk to aspects of the investments and the programs themselves, how they fit together. And it's probably aimed at 2 levels. The first level is really to give a bit more information about the programs, and then a more technical one so that you can sort of dive in and really see what they're planning to do. It also outlines how these new programs will interact and mesh with the existing AuScope programs that we continue to operate today. I'd like to also point out that these are live documents. We expect feedback, we expect changes in the geoscience research sector, and we anticipate technological advances and are ready to update and modify them over the coming years. So there'll be rolling reviews of the documents and they will change. So we want your comments, we want your questions, we want your input, and we will respond to those as much as we can. So as part of this process, we were able to refresh our organisation's vision and mission statements. I'll briefly run through those with you now. The new vision that we've come up with is to help enable a sustainable and resilient nation through predictive geoscience. And our mission is to build an integrated and collaborative research platform that services and facilitates theoretical and applied geoscience research. We've also developed 7 goals for the organisation. And these goals will underpin all AuScope activities over the coming decade, from the continued operation of our existing programs to the development of the downward-looking telescope infrastructure. These goals are to enhance AuScope's capability to enable national geoscience innovation via the building of the downward-looking telescope, develop capacity for predictive geoscience by applying global data principles and data management best practice, foster a connected community across academia, government, industry, and society, foster a diverse, innovative, and inclusive culture centred on innovation, exchange knowledge and enable an inclusive future for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, help to locate and better understand Australia's mineral, energy and groundwater services, and develop a global research capability for geoscience. The remainder of this document expands on each of these goals and provides the various implementation strategies that we propose for each one. So I'll step through that document now and just give you a bit more background about how we got there and where we're going. First, we need to identify the challenges that drive this research and this investment. So what are the primary challenges that we face as a community to which the geoscience research is most relevant? Well, food, water and environmental security issues will become more urgent as Australians place more demands on the geological services provided by the shallow crust, and particularly in the context of accelerated climate change and environmental changes and the population potentially doubling by 2066. These are real problems that we will face as a community in our lifetimes. On these pages of the document, we recognise 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals produced by the UN, 6 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals produced by the UN that are relevant to AuScope. We see these as critical guiding principles to the work that we're going to do over that time. For anybody not familiar with the SDGs, they're the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for everyone, and they leave no one behind. They were developed by the United Nations. They're recognised by the federal government and by Geoscience Australia. And as I said, we've listed 6 of the ones that are most relevant to AuScope activities here on these pages. But I think I'd like to draw your attention most critically to Sustainable Development Goal number 9, relating to industry innovation and infrastructure. This is the most relevant one to AuScope activities, and it's a series of principles that we will try to align with. So I'd suggest that you look at them if you're not familiar with them. It's also important to reflect on how we actually implement these, this alignment, because it's one thing to say you're going to align with Sustainable Development Goals. It's another to look at how you're actually doing. And when you look at how Australia's going, to be honest, we're not doing that well. So I would suggest that you follow the link that's on this page, which is the sdgtransformingaustralia.com. And it allows you to look at how we are going against these. And maybe as a community, we need to think about how we can measure our impact against Sustainable Development Goals over the next 5 to 10 years. Okay. The next couple of pages of the document attempt to define AuScope's place with respect to our partners in the research and innovation value chain, including Geoscience Australia, the State and Territory Geological Survey Organisations, and CSIRO. We also recognise on these pages the context provided by other strategic documents, including the National Research Infrastructure Roadmap, the Decadal Plan for Australian Geosciences produced by the Academy of Science, the Academy of Science's Women in STEM Decadal Plan as well, and a number of other documents such as the AMIRA Uncover Roadmap, the National Resources Statement, and the Australian Civil Space Strategy. All of these documents fit with what we're proposing here and align very nicely with the work that we propose to do. Next, we move on to the real guts of what we're talking about doing over the next 5 and 10 years. And that's the building of the DLT, or the Downward Looking Telescope. This is the primary infrastructure system that we propose. It's an integrated and augmented capability, like a telescope, that will allow researchers to see into the Earth rather than out into space, using a variety of lenses. Researchers can then capture, focus, and analyse observational data using a series of integrated digital tools. Ultimately, researchers will be able to create a digital twin of the Earth, which can be used to help understand how the Australian continent might surface our growing mineral, water, energy, and space needs in the decades ahead. The Downward Looking Telescope concept aligns with the recommendations of the Chief Scientist in the 2018 NRI Roadmap, as well as those of the Decadal Plan for Australian Geosciences. And the diagram over on the right here shows the broad concept of the DLT, with 3 lenses that have different levels of penetration and observational fidelity into the Earth, as well as a series of frameworks that allow interesting research to be done with the data produced by those lenses. The following pages of the document give a bit more detail about these lenses, and then the subsequent document more still. But I'll run through them briefly to give you a sense of what is involved. The temporal lens will comprise a suite of geochemistry and geochronology analytical services, data and analytics that will enable researchers to investigate the evolution of the Earth and other celestial bodies through deep time with unprecedented accuracy. Importantly, it will enable researchers to help locate new critical mineral resources that will underpin sustainable infrastructure and innovation, provide new export opportunities, and support better climate forecasting models by providing high-resolution records of the past. The observational lens will provide fleets of deployable and fixed geophysical and geospatial instruments that facilitate long-term and continent-wide Earth imaging, allowing researchers to see into the Earth. These will include distributed arrays of geophysical sensors across the Australian continent that will monitor the physical properties of the Earth and changes occurring over decades ahead. This will enable researchers to better understand and even predict important natural and human-induced environmental changes and geohazards over time. The characterization lens provides infrastructure to characterize the Earth's accessible crust through analysis of sample material or via borehole-based measurements, imaging, and sampling. This lens will provide researchers with the essential petrophysical properties necessary to accurately infer subsurface architecture and gain mechanistic insights into Earth processes. On top of these lenses sit two digital frameworks. The data framework will capture, organise and focus all data from DLT lenses so that researchers can analyse it in the analytical framework. Data collection will be held to the findable, accessible and interoperable and reusable or FAIR standard. It will be automated at both creation and capture, adhering to or developing community best practice. It will be open to community data repositories and delivered to facilitate data-intensive research using advanced computational and analytical methods. AuScope also recognises the importance of data stewardship over community-created, used and managed data. As such, we'll build capacity within our geoscience community to safeguard geoscience data, develop a community of practice around that data, and support researchers in data lifecycle planning and management to ensure all new DLT data meets international standards for governance, quality, and data ethics. The DLT's analytical framework brings the Earth data to life. Here, data becomes interrogable through inverse and forward modelling platforms and their constituent programs, with other analytics and computational tools providing a foundation for 4D modelling of Earth systems and delivering the Earth's digital twin as a primary data product of the DLT. Finally, all of these technical components are wrapped in an envelope of strategy, community, culture, and collaboration. These elements drive how the DLT is designed, built, and operated, and underpin the growth of the AuScope community over the decade ahead. I'll now pass over to Jo, who's going to talk to you about the next few elements of the strategy.
Thanks, Tim. And hi, everyone. It's amazing to see 92 people here today. Can't really see you, but can feel it. Thank you so much for all of your effort over the last 2 years to help pull this together. For me, it's been a real privilege to pull these ideas together, make sense of them, synthesize them as best we can for a general audience, and even throw a few of my own ideas and bit of research into the mix, particularly for these next few sections. So starting with community, our goal here is to foster a connected community across academia, government, industry, science and society. As you know, we're working across all of these areas and into the adjacent sciences nationally and internationally. As Tim mentioned earlier, or Chris, our role is evolving not just as an infrastructure provider, but as a leadership capability to help make the links, create and share new knowledge between us, and also to amplify our collective voice amongst the sciences in Australia. Given our 2018 funding security in the budget then, we've already been able to connect wider, deeper, and with a long-term mindset across the community, which is excellent. We've established a science advisory panel to the AuScope board. We have a number of pilot projects running through our Opportunity Fund, and we are participating in national initiatives like the Australian Scalable Drone Cloud with other NCRIS organisations. We now seek to be more inclusive when we collaborate with you and with NCRIS communities in planning, prioritising and developing our projects. We also seek to better support our future geoscience community by developing our outreach program to span more of the geoscience that we support. So when you've got a chance, have a peep into the implementation points there on the community to see which direction we're going in. Stepping over to culture. So our culture is the way that we behave as a collective to foster diverse ideas, customs and social behaviour during the course of planning, executing, communicating and evaluating our programs. We're now focused on fostering a diverse, innovative and inclusive culture that is centred on enabling purposeful innovation, not just innovation for innovation's sake, in alignment with the global movement. We're funded to deliver on this innovation, and as Dr. Sarah Moron aptly puts it in this plan, diversity drives innovation, and we each need to actively foster inclusive science for these richer outputs that we're seeking. So we'll now seek to, not seek to, we're doing it. We'll now incorporate diversity benchmarks into our funding agreements, foster multidisciplinary initiatives, and use human-centred design methodologies to develop our strategy, our operations, our products and our services so that they are fit for our researchers to do the research they need to do to affect society. It's exciting to imagine how much better our collective effort will be for people on the planet once we start to enact meaningful change in this space. I'll just take a moment to point you to two things. The first is the 2019 Women in STEM Decadal Plan. I'll post a link to that here shortly. That plan came out last year and it brings to the fore some of the confronting statistics for women in STEM and in earth sciences that we all need to address systemically as a starting point for that, to reach some kind of diversity in our space. If you want an example of what I mean when it comes to incorporating things beyond the sciences, I'd point you to the Earth Enabled Research Group at MIT Media Lab in the States, whose purpose is to advance justice in Earth's complex systems through a combination of design thinking, art, social science, complex systems, satellite engineering and data science. That's a really exciting group that they have running there. And I think that we all know complex challenges that we're pointing towards at this point in history require a multidisciplinary response beyond just our sciences. So I'd love to see us as a wider community responding to the challenges of the times like the MIT group seem to be doing. Next page. So my final input here is for Indigenous collaboration. Via our partners, AuScope has been working respectfully with a number of Indigenous communities for a number of years in executing our research infrastructure programs across the continent. Now, in full support of the diversity and STEM movement and in the spirit of reconciliation, we seek to better co-design, execute and reflect on our activities with Indigenous communities, support education and employment opportunities for Indigenous people, and work to ensure that our science does not privilege any one perspective over the other. We have a lot of work to do there. I think a starting point for us is to educate ourselves and each other. Just a few weeks back, CSIRO helped to launch the Our Knowledge, Our Way guidelines. They've been prepared by the National Indigenous Science Community. It details Indigenous-led approaches to strengthening and sharing our knowledge for land and sea management. Please join us in reading those. It's a great resource and a starting point for many discussions that we'll be having with Indigenous communities, with leadership communities across Science and Technology Australia, and with each other to enact non-performative change in the coming years. I'll pop a link to that across here in the chat in a minute as well. So in summary, for each of these three goals, what does it mean for you as a developer or a user of our research infrastructure? I think in general, you can expect to hear more from us and about different things as we start to reimagine ourselves and our individual and collective agency and our programs in line with this strategy. And I really look forward to helping shape the next phase with you all.
Thanks very much, Jo. So moving on to industry collaboration. As we've already mentioned, the impact and the importance of geoscience-based industries on the Australian economy cannot be underestimated. As a result, a key component of our strategy relates to the provision of research infrastructure that helps to locate and better understand Australia's mineral, energy and groundwater services. In this area, we take our lead from the Uncover Roadmap and the Decadal Plan for Australian Geoscience, as well as our ongoing collaborations with Geoscience Australia, the state and territory geoscience organisations, CSIRO, and our industry partners. We will address this need by building the downward-looking telescope and engaging with our industry partners to ensure that data delivered by it is relevant not only to academic researchers, but also to industry and government-based geoscientists. We also plan to prioritise new projects that support research relevant to the discovery of critical minerals and other strategic resources, including groundwater and sustainable energy resources. Finally, we also recognise our increasingly international focus. AuScope has a number of research infrastructure peers around the world, many of which are already aligned with our activities. For example, the European Plate Observing System, or EPOS. However, there's currently no global research infrastructure for geoscience. We believe that this represents a gap and presents an enormous opportunity to align our global communities to develop strategies to enable global instrument deployments and data management practices and standards. Here we outline our approach to supporting and, where possible, leading the development for a GRI for the geosciences. So that's the end of the first document, the strategy. And as I said, this is a standalone document that will be utilised by AuScope no matter what the next 10 years hold. The second document is the 5-year investment plan. Now, I won't go into so much detail in this document because it's just really more of an in-depth look at the downward-looking telescope. It represents the overall view of the downward-looking telescope. And as I said, it provides much more detailed discussion of each of the lenses. So here you can see the page on the temporal lens, but I would encourage you to go and have a look at this, to read through it, to dive into the different programs that are proposed and how they fit together. And we're certainly interested in your feedback on what's listed in this document. At the end of the document, there's also a series of tables which give even more detail about the specific programs themselves, and also some sort of broad estimates of costings around these programs. We also have some detailed project outlines for each of these programs that haven't been included in the documents, but if you're interested in getting a bit more information, either about the scope of work, the intended investments, or the costings, then please get in touch with us and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you about that. There's one other diagram in this document that I'd like to draw your attention to, and that's this one on page 18. And this is a diagram that outlines how all of these new proposed programs fit with the existing AuScope model, add to the capability that it already provides, add to the diversity of the data sets that we will be able to deliver when we build the DLT, and adds to the impact that the AuScope program will have for geoscience in Australia. So that brings us to the end of what we wanted to talk to you about today. I'd like to reiterate that these are live documents, and we're really happy to receive feedback and suggestions at any time. If you think there's a gap, let us know. We'd really love to hear any feedback that you have about the documents as they stand today. We'll also reiterate that we'll be reaching out to everyone regarding our goals and implementation points from time to time. We'll seek voluntary participation consistent with our commitment to fostering diversity and inclusivity in the ongoing research infrastructure development process. So I'd really like to thank you all very much again for joining us today. I'd like to thank you all very much again for the input that you've all had into the development of these documents, and would very gratefully receive any questions that you might have for us in the chat box. And maybe while Joe's just having a look through that, I'll just see if Chris wants to have anything to say to close as well.
Thank you, Tim. No, thank you very much to both of you for, I think, a great overview, and I encourage everyone, as you have, to have a look at the documents and to provide feedback. As Tim has said, they're living documents, but again, these are your documents. They're not something that AuScope has developed without your input. So there's a great opportunity here for you to influence the way we present the investment plan and the information that you would like to see. But again, thank you for participating today, and we hope you find it interesting. And it doesn't look like we're being inundated with questions. Is that right, Joe? So everybody has a do. So here comes something. So again,
there is. Oh, just a
thank you for playing. So what have we got?
We have no questions, just a thank you from Juan. Alfonso, thank you.
All right, well, look.
Karina and Alex and Sandra. We can
All
take
right, well, look, if there are, okay, what are the next steps? I can see that one. Excellent. Yeah, look, thanks very much for the question, Juan Alfonso. The next steps are for us to use these documents for two particular things. The first is to reshape the way AuScope operates day to day. That's critical. But the second is to use the investments, particularly around the downward-looking telescope that are outlined here, to influence the next NCRIS investment planning process, which is really just kicking off at the moment. So there's a new NCRIS road mapping process being undertaken, and that will take place over the next 12 months. We will use the investment plan that we present here to help to influence decisions that are made around that road mapping process. And we'll be calling on all of you in the community to help support this proposal for new research infrastructure investment for the geosciences. I'm sure you're all probably aware that the last roadmap didn't really give a lot of focus to the geosciences and the need of our community for new research infrastructure investment. So we'll seek to use these documents to make a strong case for that new investment. Of course, these are difficult times to predict how things will go, but we're certainly optimistic that there are a lot of opportunities for us over the next 12 months to present these documents and use them to influence that discussion.
We've got a couple more questions coming through. Can you see them, Tim? Probably.
I can if I click over here. Yep. Oh, we do too. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the next one in line comes from Janica, actually, from over in the chat. Can you please discuss financial outlook for the next 5 to 10 years? You might have just come on.
Okay, so I guess I touched on that. Look, AuScope has a program funding in place until 2023. A considerable portion of that is allocated to existing operational requirements for our existing programs. But the board has decided to keep a portion of that aside each year to try to develop some new pilot projects. So people who are submitting, so we'll put out a call every year for proposals to that opportunity fund. People who are submitting proposals to that, we would stress that you should read these documents before you do and make sure that whatever you propose aligns with the strategy and investment plan presented here. And so we do hope to be able to develop a number of new pilots over the next few years that potentially will develop into longer-lived AuScope programs over the next decade. In terms of the future funding, the NCRIS program does have 10 years of funding. Only the first 5 years have been allocated. So that's what this road mapping process that I talked about briefly before is trying to define what the needs are for the next 5 years of new capital investment through that program. Obviously, with COVID, we really don't know what the future is going to look like in this space, but we're really optimistic because national research infrastructure investment is actually a great way to do stimulus spending. And we think there are enormous opportunities to provide huge leverage on funding that's provided through the NCRIS program and real benefits to Australian society. So whilst it'll be a difficult environment, we do have great optimism. Chris, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything onto any of this as well.
Well, thanks, Tim. I think that was an excellent answer. I think that we're very fortunate in the COVID environment where budgets are going to be at risk. I think that a decision was made a little while ago to give us 10 years of certainty in the AuScope program, which is a direct consequence, if you all recall, of the uncertainty over several years in the teens, where we couldn't get anything more than a 12-month outlook for the whole of the NCRIS programs. So the decision that was made a couple of years ago to give us 10 years of certainty, I think will stand us in good stead over the next few years. It doesn't guarantee that we'll continue to have that funding, but it makes it harder to remove it. So I think in a lot of ways, we're actually well placed. And the big challenge for us is to actually influence the next set of decisions around the next investment regime to make sure that we do get increase in the capital allocation so that we can actually help you get some more kit to do what you need to do. So Joe, there's another question here, I think that's partly answered from Graham. Did you want to talk to the one, from Nick around the federal, state petroleum and minerals programs, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for that one, Nick. Yeah, look, we already have strong engagement into both the state and federal, particularly the minerals programs. I guess we haven't had as strong an engagement into the petroleum space, maybe as we would like. We have active AuScope programs at all of the state geological surveys around the high logger instruments and the National Virtual Core Library. We'll certainly be looking to build those, and we'll certainly be engaging very strongly with particularly the state geological survey organisations to find out what their research infrastructure gaps are that AuScope can help play a role in. We've had a long engagement in this space, particularly around data delivery and providing interoperability across the different data delivery systems that the states have. This is a changing need. Geoscience Australia are now providing, fantastic data delivery tools through their Exploring for the Future program. So we know that this space is changing, and we think that's a great opportunity for AuScope to maybe pick up some of the other areas relating to the state and federal geological surveys, where there are needs that aren't currently funded through some of that ongoing funding through GA or through the state surveys. Just with respect to Graham's question that I can see there, talking about how the program will be implemented in practice. So we'll be putting this investment plan to the Commonwealth. We'll be using it to influence the next roadmap. And, we are optimistic that we'll be successful in getting new capital. When we are, there will be a process of really defining exactly how these different programs will be implemented, where and what level of investment we will make in those. So that will be another round of deep community engagement, but very much defined by the structure of this investment plan and this strategy. So it won't be a competitive round process. It will be a really deep engagement with the community to identify how this should be built and what the detail is around how we build the infrastructure system.
Okay, thank you, Leanne, for your comment there. John Huntington. Okay, thanks, Tim. John, Chris, the success and impact of AuScope has a lot to do with its perception and acceptance by the Australian public and political landscape. If this is accepted, can you spell out a bit more how AuScope will tackle this goal of increasing Australia-wide acceptance of its goals?
Sure, look, I'll touch on that and then maybe I'll hand over to Jo, because to a large degree, that's the work that she's intimately involved in day to day. But we have massively increased the way we engage with the public over the last couple of years. So we spend a lot of time and effort now trying to get stories around impact, around what AuScope's doing and what we plan to do not just into the geoscience community or into the funding bodies we deal with, but into the broader community. And we're trying to engage people in geosciences. We're trying to move away from the view that geosciences are just about mining and show that geoscience is really about global sustainability and being able to live on this planet into the future successfully and to thrive as the human race. And so we're trying to change the perception of geoscience, and we're also trying to tell the stories that show, you know, what great research infrastructure investment can allow in the research space. So I'll maybe just hand over to Jo just to touch on that as well.
Yeah, I think immediately the opportunity for us is to engage and draw on the expertise of Science and Technology Australia, who really operate in a communication space, but more towards the policy end of the spectrum, which isn't my particular expertise, but they offer a service to us as an entire community. So we can really take on board some of the tips that they have for us in terms of getting our message out into society, direct through politicians in local jurisdictions, and also out through outreach programs and other public science opportunities. So we haven't scoped anything there, but we are in contact with STA all of the time, and these are the next steps that we'll look to take to really try and make it synonymous with geoscience, that being sustainability, not the dirty science, which sometimes we do get slugged with. So that's probably my challenge of a lifetime, to be honest, is to try and overcome that and help us all to communicate what it is that we do, and that we are all pushing in the right direction for society and sustainability.
Thanks very much, Jo.
The next question, I might jump back over to the chat, which is coming from Rowan. Hi, Jo. Unsurprisingly, I'd love to hear more about outreach. We geoscientists do far too little outreach, and it diminishes our impact and influence as a field. But to do it well, we have to be organised. What's AuScope's plan to help us amplify our work as a collective? That's a great question. And to be honest, we haven't come too far other than to just get these plans out the door right now and make sure they have the right ingredients in them for us to follow up on the things we say we're going to be doing. But in my mind, when it comes to outreach, I feel as though we have great potential, as you say, even with respect to other nations who are doing a lot more outreach than what we are collectively here in Australia. I think we need to take that human-centered design approach to scoping what is a viable outreach program for us in AuScope and across the geosciences. So that being sort of twofold for me to dip out to people like you, Rowan, in fact, everybody, anyone who has some ideas about outreach in the community. I know everyone does and is really passionate about that. But also to go to the schools and find out what hasn't worked in the past with earth science. I know from personal experience, from speaking to a teacher, that they actually just dropped earth science within their science subject at school because it felt too hard, they didn't understand it. So my knowledge of the space is very, very limited. I haven't begun scoping it at all, but I would really like to make sure that we make the most of all of the geoscience we're doing and communicate that as best possible as we can with the next gen scientists in the most frugal way possible. I guess my time's reasonably limited. All of our time is reasonably limited, but like you say, we're very coordinated. We take a proper design approach to designing a program that is fit for purpose and has uptake. I think we'll be doing a good thing. So I'm really excited to take that process with everyone, using maybe like the IDEO approach to design thinking. We can run a project and really scope it out together.
The other aspect to that, of course, is that we have invested quite a bit into our in-schools programs. So the majority of our outreach that we currently do is through our seismometers in schools and our GPS in schools programs. We see a great opportunity for growing in that area and for growing in the citizen science space. It's probably an area that Australian geoscience really doesn't have much of an impact. So, and many of the other NCRIS capabilities are really looking at ways of developing their citizen science programs. So I think there's a great opportunity for us there. And as Joe said, you know, part of the challenge for us as geoscientists is to try to engage with the schools, because it's difficult to teach geology, it's difficult to teach geoscience. So if we can make that easier for those schools and provide resources in the way that the ANU group has, you know, done a fantastic effort through the AuSCIS program, then we can make that easier, and it helps with our outreach, but it also helps with the, you know, the skills shortages that we certainly have in the geoscience space going forwards, and the enrolment numbers that we see when we get into university. There's a question here from Rodri. Can I jump to that one, Joe?
Yeah.
Q&A. So Rodri's asking whether these plans will have an immediate impact through the current opportunity fund, or we're looking at changes further down the line. The answer to that, Rodri, is that the current opportunity fund round, as you're aware, closed some time ago. Those are currently in review, and we will be providing a response to that round very shortly. Obviously, the strategy will have some impact because it's been in development for some time, and the downward-looking telescope concept has been socialised for some time. So, you know, it will have an impact. But going forward, certainly in the next round of the Opportunity Fund, we would like to see very tight alignment with what's presented in these two documents in any proposals that we receive in future Opportunity Fund rounds.
Okay, and then there's one other question coming across from Janica in the chat. DLT sounds very much like the US array. How do we plan to collaborate with international partners?
Thanks, Janica. Yeah, look, we've already started to develop those collaborations. We have a very strong relationship with EPOS, the European Plate Observing System. And we also have strong relationships with a number of the US-based bodies, including IRIS and a number of the data groups. We have some relationship with the US array. So we plan to build and grow those relationships. We're currently in the process of signing an agreement with EPOS to align our research activities, or align some of our standardisation and other activities in that space, and to learn from each other. So there's a huge opportunity, as I mentioned, to sort of build that international collaboration. And as I said, you know, we may not be able to develop a global research infrastructure in the truest sense of the term, but we would certainly like to try to establish a much more formal relationship with a number of these bodies to allow data to be delivered in the same sorts of ways, to be accessible, you know, through the same sorts of searches, and to be a bit less distinguishable whether you're getting data from Australia or the US or from Europe. And I think we're well placed to be able to drive that. So it doesn't look like there's any more questions here, Joe. Is the chat empty too? I can't actually see the chat.
I think that's everything, yeah.
All right. Well, look, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. As we said, if you do have any more questions or thoughts that come to you over the next little bit, then please give us a call or shoot us through an email, and we'll absolutely respond to you. And we'll also put any responses that we want to publish up on the website as well. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you over the next 10 years to build this thing.